Commander Zheng Liang pressed her palm against the cool titanium bulkhead of Meridian's Promise and felt the ship's subtle vibrations through her fingertips. 3 months ago, she had been overseeing routine terraforming surveys in the Centauri system. Now she found herself at the edge of the solar system, staring through the observation deck's reinforced viewport at something that shouldn't exist. The wormhole hung in space like a wound in reality itself, its edges crackling with exotic energies that made her instruments scream warnings. It pulsed with an otherworldly rhythm, expanding and contracting like a cosmic heartbeat against the backdrop of Neptune's azure disk. The phenomenon had appeared without warning 6 weeks ago, sending shock waves through the scientific community and triggering the fastest diplomatic mission preparation in human history. "Commander, we're receiving another transmission," Dr. Elena Vasquez called from her station. The xenolinguist's dark eyes were bloodshot from weeks of analyzing the incomprehensible signals emanating from beyond the wormhole. Same pattern as before, but with additional harmonic layers. Zhen turned from the viewport, her reflection ghosting across the star field. At 38, she had already commanded 3 successful first contact missions, but none had prepared her for this. The beings on the other side, designated Cthar by the linguistic team, didn't communicate through radio waves or mathematical sequences like every other species humanity had encountered. Their messages came as complex psychic emanations that bypassed conventional language entirely. "Play it through the neural interface," Jin ordered, settling into her command chair. The bridge of the Meridian's Promise had been specially modified for this mission, equipped with experimental psychic amplification arrays, and the most sophisticated translation matrices Earth could provide. Dr. Amara Chun, the ship's leading xenopsychologist, looked up from her console with concern. "Commander, I recommend limiting exposure. The crew has already reported unusual dream activity after our last communication attempt." "Noted, but we need to understand them before we make contact." Jin activated the neural interface, feeling the familiar tingle as the quantum field generators came online. Limited exposure, 5 minutes maximum. The Cthar transmission flowed through her consciousness like liquid starlight. Images cascaded through her mind, vast crystalline cities that sang with harmonious frequencies, beings of pure thought moving through dimensions humans could barely comprehend. And underneath it all, a profound sense of urgency that made her heart race. But there was something else, something that felt like a warning wrapped in sorrow. Glimpses of darkness spreading between stars, of worlds going silent, of an approaching tide that devoured light itself. Zheng gasped and severed the connection, her hands trembling slightly as she removed the neural interface headset. The bridge spun for a moment before her vision cleared. "Commander?" Dr. Vasquez approached with a medical scanner. "Your neural activity spiked off the charts. What did you see?" "They're trying to tell us something," Jin said slowly, the alien emotion still echoing in her mind. "Something about a threat. But their communication method." She paused, struggling to put the experience into words. "It's not just telepathy. They think and exist differently than we do. Their consciousness operates on multiple dimensional layers simultaneously." Dr. Marcus Webb, the mission's diplomatic specialist, leaned forward in his chair. A veteran of the Rigel Accords, he had helped establish peaceful relations with the crystalline Zephyrians and the hive-minded collective of Proxima B. "Commander, if they're warning us about a threat, we need to establish formal contact. The diplomatic protocols are useless here," Jin interrupted. "This isn't about trade agreements or territorial disputes. The Cthar experience reality in ways we can barely imagine. Their warnings aren't just information. They're emotional memories, shared experiences from across space and time." The wormhole pulsed brighter outside the viewport, its energies sending ripples through local space-time. The Meridian's Promise shuddered slightly, its inertial dampeners compensating for the gravitational anomalies. "Commander," Lieutenant Sarah Kim called from the navigation station, "the wormhole is stabilizing. Whatever's generating on the other side, they're making it safer for passage." Dr. Chin frowned at her readings. "The psychic emanations are increasing too. It's as if they're preparing for something." Jun stood and walked to the central holographic display, where a 3-dimensional representation of the wormhole rotated slowly. The exotic matter signatures were unlike anything in human science, suggesting technology far beyond their current capabilities. "They know we're here," she said finally, "and they're inviting us through. Or luring us," Dr. Webb added grimly. "Commander, with respect, we should wait for the fleet. 3 ships would be too late." The conviction in Jun's voice surprised even her. "Whatever's coming, whatever they're warning us about, it's urgent. I can feel it." She turned to address her crew, seeing the mix of fear and anticipation in their faces. The Meridian's promise carried humanity's best and brightest: xenologists who had decoded the languages of a dozen species, diplomats who had prevented 3 interstellar wars, and scientists who pushed the boundaries of human understanding. "Ladies and gentlemen, we came here to make first contact with the Cthar. They're opening a path for us, and they're trying to warn us about something that threatens more than just humanity." Jun's voice carried the authority of command, but also the weight of a decision. "We're going through." Dr. Vasquez exchanged glances with her colleagues. "Commander, what if we can't get back? The wormhole could collapse, stranding us in alien space. Then we make sure our warning gets through." Jim returned to her command chair and began the pre-flight sequence. "All stations, prepare for dimensional transit. Set course for the wormhole center. And everyone—" She paused, looking at each member of her crew. "Keep your minds open. I have a feeling we're about to discover that the universe is far stranger than we ever imagined." The Meridian's promise approached the wormhole's event horizon, like a pearl sliding down a throat of liquid space. The ship's hull sang with harmonic vibrations as exotic particles washed over its shields, and the bridge lights flickered with patterns that seemed almost alive. "Hull integrity holding," reported Chief Engineer Marcus Torres from a station. "But I'm reading dimensional flux in the quantum foam. Whatever this thing is, it's not following standard physics." Jin gripped her command chair's armrests as reality began to bend around them. Through the viewport, she watched Neptune stretch and distort, its familiar blue surface elongating into impossible geometries before snapping back to normal. The stars themselves seemed to pulse in rhythm with the wormhole's heartbeat. "Neural activity is spiking across all decks," Dr. Chen announced, her voice tight with concern. "The crew is experiencing spontaneous REM sleep patterns while awake. It's as if the boundary between conscious and unconscious thought is breaking down." Dr. Vasquez hunched over her translation console, her fingers flying across holographic interfaces. "Commander, I'm detecting massive increases in the Cthar transmissions. It's not random. There's a structured pattern, like a guided meditation or a preparation ritual." The wormhole's interior was a kaleidoscope of impossible colors, shifting fractals of light that made human perception ache. Jin felt her consciousness expanding, touching the edges of something vast and alien. Images flashed through her mind, towering spires of living crystal that hummed with the thoughts of beings beyond physical form, vast networks of consciousness spanning galaxies, and underneath it all, a growing darkness that consumed everything it touched. "Transit time to the other side?" she managed to ask, her voice sounding distant to her own ears. "Unknown," Lieutenant Kim replied, her instruments fluctuating wildly. "Time itself is behaving strangely here. We could emerge seconds after we entered, or years might have passed." The ship shuddered as it passed through layers of folded space-time, each transition accompanied by a wave of alien thoughts that washed over the crew. Jin saw flashes of the Cthar themselves, beings of pure consciousness that moved through multiple dimensions simultaneously, their forms shifting between energy and something resembling crystalline matrices. But there was something else in their thoughts, a deep sadness mixed with desperate urgency. They were ancient, she realized, older than human civilization by eons. And they were dying. "Commander?" Dr. Webb's voice cut through a reverie. "Look at this." The diplomatic specialist had activated a secondary display, showing long-range sensor data. Even through the wormhole's distortions, they could detect massive energy signatures ahead. Structures the size of small planets, but clearly artificial. "A Dyson sphere?" Dr. Chen breathed, her scientific curiosity overriding her earlier concerns. "Multiple spheres," Lieutenant Kim corrected, her voice filled with awe. "I'm reading at least 17 massive constructs, all in a stable orbital pattern around what appears to be a brown dwarf star. Jin forced herself to focus on the tactical implications. Defensive capabilities? Unknown, but the energy output suggests they could disintegrate our entire fleet without effort. Torres reported grimly. Commander, if these beings wanted us dead, we'd already be atomized. The wormhole's exit approached like the light at the end of the tunnel, growing from a pinprick to a blazing aperture that filled their entire field of view. As they emerged into normal space, the alien system revealed itself in its full glory. 17 massive spheres hung in the void like pearls on an invisible string, each one larger than Earth's moon and pulsing with energies that defied classification. They weren't solid structures, but rather frameworks of crystalline lattices that seemed to exist partially in normal space and partially in dimensions beyond human perception. By all the gods, Dr. Vasquez whispered, her translation equipment chirping frantically as it tried to process the cacophony of signals emanating from the megastructures. But it was Dr. Chun who voiced what they were all feeling. They're not just buildings. They're thinking. Each sphere is a collective consciousness, billions of minds linked together. The Cthar had built their civilization not in physical space, but in the realm of thought itself, using these dimensional frameworks to anchor their consciousness to reality. And as the Meridian's promise drifted deeper into their system, Jin realized that the beings were already reaching out to them. All stop, she ordered, her voice barely steady. Hold position. Dr. Chen, are you reading any hostile intent? The xenopsychologist shook her head slowly, her eyes wide with wonder. No hostility, but, Commander, they're preparing to make contact, not through radio or visual signals, but directly with our minds. They want to share their thoughts, their memories, their entire history. And their warning, Jin added, remembering the urgency she felt in their earlier transmissions. Lieutenant Kim's console erupted in alarms. Commander, I'm detecting gravitational anomalies throughout the system. Something massive is approaching from the outer system. On the main display, a new contact appeared, a dark object the size of a small asteroid, but moving with purpose and intelligence. As it drew closer, they could see that it wasn't natural. Its surface was a complex matrix of geometric patterns that seemed to absorb light itself. It's not Cthar technology, Dr. Vasquez said, her voice filled with growing dread. The harmonic signature is completely different. She paused, consulting her instruments. It's wrong. The patterns are designed to disrupt consciousness, to break down the barriers between minds. Jeanne felt a chill run down her spine as the pieces began falling into place. The Cthar warnings, their desperate attempt at communication, the darkness she had glimpsed in their shared memories. It was all connected. Red alert, she commanded, her training taking over even as her mind reeled with the implications. All hands to battle stations. Dr. Chun, can you establish contact with Cthar? We need to understand what we're facing. I'm trying, but the approaching object is generating some kind of psychic interference. It's like it's designed to prevent exactly the kind of communication the Cthar specialize in. The dark object drew closer, and with it came a pressing weight on their thoughts, a suffocating presence that seemed to squeeze the light out of their minds. Jin realized with growing horror that they weren't just witnessing a first contact scenario. They had arrived in the middle of a war for the very nature of consciousness itself. The dark object, which Dr. Vasquez had designated as contact hostile, settled into a holding pattern just outside the Cthar sphere network. It pulsed with malevolent rhythm that made the bridge lighting flicker and caused several crew members to report severe headaches. Commander, we're receiving transmission, Dr. Chen announced, her face pale. But it's not coming through our communication arrays. It's going directly into our minds. Jeanne felt it too, a cold presence pressing against her consciousness like ice water flowing through her thoughts. Unlike the warm, complex emanations from Cthar, this was surgical and precise, designed to dissect rather than communicate. You have come far to die, little sparks. The voice echoed through every mind on the ship simultaneously, carrying with images of dead worlds and extinguished stars. Jeanne gritted her teeth and activated the neural dampening field, but the presence pushed through their defenses effortlessly. The dreamers have called you to witness their ending. How fitting. All hands. Implement Protocol 7. Jin ordered through the ship's comm system. Protocol 7 was the emergency psychic defense measure developed after humanity's first encounter with telepathic species. It involved controlled meditation techniques and neural synchronization to create mental barriers. But even as her crew began the defensive procedures, Jin realized they were facing something far beyond human understanding. The entity, for lack of a better term, wasn't just telepathic. It existed in the spaces between thoughts, in the quantum foam where consciousness touched reality. Dr. Webb struggled to his console, his face contorted with the effort of maintaining his mental shields. "Commander, I'm trying to analyze the transmission patterns. This isn't random aggression. It's probing us, learning how our minds work. Can we jam it?" "I don't think so. It's not using electromagnetic frequencies. It's operating on the same dimensional levels as the Cthar, but with opposite intent. Where they seek to share and connect, this thing wants to isolate and consume." Another wave of hostile thoughts washed over them, and this time Jin caught glimpses of the entity's true nature. It was ancient beyond measure, born in the dark spaces between galaxies where consciousness was weak and scattered. It fed on the death of minds, growing stronger with each civilization it destroyed. The Cthar spheres began to pulse in unison, their crystalline structures resonating with harmonics that pushed back against the dark entity's influence. Through the neural interface, Jin felt their desperate attempts at communication breaking through the psychic interference. "We greet you, small lights of distant home. We are the Cthar, shepherds of thought and guardians of the dream paths. You have come at the ending time." The voice was warm and multifaceted, like a chorus of ancient beings speaking in perfect harmony. But underneath the greeting, Jin sensed profound exhaustion and barely contained fear. "Tell us about the threat," she projected back, hoping her thoughts could bridge the species gap. Images flooded her mind, not just visual representations, but complete sensory and emotional experiences. She saw the entity's first appearance in Cthar space, emerging from a void between galaxies like a cancer metastasizing through healthy tissue. It had already consumed 3 major civilizations, leaving behind empty stellar systems where once vibrant cultures had thrived. The silence bringer devours the light of consciousness. The Cthar continued. It spreads from mind to mind, breaking connections that make thought possible. We have fought for 1,000 cycles, but we grow weak. Soon, it will turn toward your spiral stars. The Milky Way, Dr. Vasquez breathed, having picked up portions of the exchange through her translation equipment. It's heading for our galaxy. The dark entity, the silence bringer, pulsed with malicious amusement as it detected their conversation. Another psychic assault crashed over the ship, this one carrying detailed images of Earth's destruction, of human minds withering and dying as the entity drained their capacity for thought itself. "But first, you will serve as examples." It projected with cold satisfaction. "Your species will learn to fear the coming silence." Lieutenant Kim screamed and collapsed at her station, her consciousness overwhelmed by the entity's focused attention. Dr. Chin rushed to her side with a neural stabilizer, but the damage was clear. The young officer's mind had been fractured, her higher brain functions temporarily scattered. "That's enough," Jin snarled, her protective instincts overriding her diplomatic training. She activated the ship's experimental quantum resonance array, designed for communication with energy-based life forms. But instead of sending a greeting, she channeled every ounce of her determination and defiance into a focused psychic pulse. The effect was immediate and unexpected. The silence bringer recoiled as it struck, its dark form wavering for a moment before solidifying again. But more importantly, the Cthar responded to her action with something resembling hope. "You fight as we fight," they observed with growing excitement. "Your mind fire burns bright, despite your small form. Perhaps there is another way." "What do you mean?" Jin asked, helping Dr. Chin stabilize Lieutenant Kim's neural patterns. The silence bringer feeds on isolated consciousness, on minds that stand alone in the dark. But when many lights join together, when thought patterns synchronize across species and dimensions, it cannot consume what it cannot separate. Dr. Webb looked up from his analysis console, his expression grim but determined. "Commander, I think they're suggesting some kind of psychic alliance. A joining of human and Cthar consciousness to create a unified defense." "The risks," Dr. Chin began. are irrelevant. Jin cut her off. If this thing reaches Earth, our entire species is dead. We have to try. The Silence Bringer seemed to sense their growing unity and pressed its attack with renewed fury. The ship's hull groaned under the psychic assault, and several more crew members collapsed as their minds were targeted for destruction. But the Cthar were moving now, their 17 spheres shifting into a new configuration that created a protective barrier around the human ship. Their combined consciousness reached out like a warm embrace, offering to share not just their thoughts, but their very existence. Will you trust us, small lights? Will you let us show you the true nature of the dream paths? Jin looked around the bridge at her crew. Brilliant minds who had dedicated their lives to understanding the universe and bringing species together in peace. They were frightened, but they were also resolved. This was why they had become explorers, to face the unknown and protect humanity from threats beyond imagination. Do it, she said, removing her neural dampening field and opening her mind completely to the Cthar network. Show us how to fight. The moment Jin opened her consciousness to the Cthar network, reality exploded into dimensions she had never imagined. Her awareness expanded beyond the confines of her physical form, touching the vast web of interconnected minds that spanned the 17 spheres. She was simultaneously herself and part of something infinitely larger. She could feel Dr. Vasquez's linguistic patterns meshing with alien grammar structures, Dr. Chen's psychological frameworks adapting to multidimensional thought processes, and Dr. Webb's diplomatic instincts reaching across species barriers to forge understanding. Welcome to the greater dream. The Cthar collective whispered through her expanded consciousness. Here, all thoughts are one. All minds are connected. This is what the Silence Bringer seeks to destroy. Through their shared awareness, Jin began to understand the true scope of the conflict. The Cthar weren't just another alien species. They were the remnants of an ancient alliance that had once spanned multiple galaxies. Dozens of civilizations had joined their consciousness network, creating a vast community of minds that shared knowledge, art, and experience across the cosmos. But the Silence Bringer had appeared from the void between galactic clusters, a predator that fed on the connections between conscious beings. It didn't just kill, it severed the bonds that made complex thought possible, reducing vibrant civilizations to empty shells that could no longer dream or imagine. We were 700 billion strong when it first came, the Cthar memories revealed. Now we are perhaps 1 billion, and our strength fades with each passing cycle. Show me how it attacks. Jin projected into the collective consciousness. The Cthar share their experiences with reluctant sorrow. The Silence Bringer operated by introducing psychic viruses into connected minds, thought patterns designed to create isolation and paranoia. Civilizations that had lived in harmony for millennia suddenly turn on each other, breaking the very connections that had made them strong. But as Jin experienced these memories, she also felt something the Cthar had missed, a pattern in the attacks that suggested the entity wasn't invincible. It has to establish a foothold, she realized, her thoughts rippling through the network. It can't just destroy a connected civilization instantly. It needs time to plant its psychic seeds and let them grow. Dr. Webb's consciousness touched hers with excitement. That's why they're trying to destroy us first. We're not connected to their network yet, so we're vulnerable to direct assault. But if we can establish the link fully, the small lights understand. The Cthar collective pulse was something approaching joy. Your minds work differently than ours, more chaotic, more individualistic. The Silence Bringer's viruses might not affect you as they affect us. Outside the shared consciousness, the Silence Bringer was growing impatient. Its dark form pulsed with malevolent energy as it prepared for a final assault on both the human ship and the Cthar spheres. But something had changed in the psychic atmosphere. The joining of human and Cthar minds had created harmonics it hadn't encountered before. Dr. Chen's psychological training allowed her to map the entity's attack patterns in real time. It's probing for weak points in our collective consciousness, she reported through the network. But our neural pathways are so different from Cthar thought processes that it can't find a consistent foothold. Then we give it one, Jin said, a dangerous plan forming in her mind. We let it think it's winning. The idea was risky beyond measure. They would have to partially lower their psychic defenses, allowing the Silence Bringer to begin its infection process, while maintaining enough connection to the Cthar network to avoid complete destruction. Unwise, Several Cthar voices whispered, "The Silence Bringer has consumed minds far more powerful than yours. If you fail, your entire species becomes vulnerable. And if we succeed, we learn how to stop it," Jin countered. "How to immunize other civilizations against its attacks. This might be our only chance to end the threat permanently." Through the collective consciousness, she could feel the debate raging among the Cthar. They were tired, worn down by centuries of defensive battles. The prospect of taking the offensive against their ancient enemy was both terrifying and exhilarating. Finally, one voice emerged from the collective, ancient beyond measure, carrying the weight of eons of accumulated wisdom. "We have hidden for too long, protected what remained rather than fighting for what was lost. If the small lights are willing to risk everything, then we will stand with them. But the danger is beyond calculation." Lieutenant Kim, her consciousness partially restored by Dr. Chen's treatment, added her voice to the growing alliance. Her mind still bore the scars of the Silence Bringer's attack, making her uniquely qualified to understand its methods. "I can feel how it works," she projected weakly. "It doesn't just attack thoughts. It attacks the connections between thoughts. It makes you forget how to think in concepts, how to link ideas together. If we can document the process, we can develop countermeasures." Dr. Vasquez finished, her linguistic expertise already working to create a framework for analyzing psychic viruses. The decision made, the combined human Kadar consciousness began its most dangerous gambit. They opened a carefully controlled channel, allowing the Silence Bringer limited access to their shared mental space, while maintaining strict quarantine protocols around their core thoughts. The entity struck immediately, pouring its corrupted essence through the opening like toxic sludge through a crack in a dam. Jin felt her thoughts becoming sluggish, her ability to form complex ideas fragmenting under the assault. But she also felt the Cthar consciousness supporting her, their ancient mental disciplines creating buffers around the infection site. And through it all, her crew's unique human perspective allowed them to observe and document the attack in ways the Cthar had never managed. "It's beautiful," Dr. Chen observed with scientific detachment, even as parts of her mind went numb. "Horrifying, but beautiful. The virus patterns are like fractals, self-replicating at every level of consciousness. And highly specialized," Dr. Webb added. "Each strain is adapted to specific thought patterns. That's why it's having trouble with us. We think too differently." The Silence Bringer, realizing it was being studied, pressed its attack with renewed fury. But instead of achieving quick victory, it found itself bogged down in a mental quagmire of incompatible consciousness types and adaptive defenses. For the first time in eons, the ancient predator experienced something approaching confusion. And in that moment of uncertainty, Jin struck. Drawing on every ounce of command authority and personal determination, Jin focused the combined human Kadar consciousness into a single, coherent weapon. But instead of attacking the Silence Bringer directly, she did something unexpected. She opened her mind completely and invited it in. "Come then," she projected with deadly calm. "If you want to consume human consciousness, then taste what we truly are." The entity, surprised by this apparent surrender, poured its essence into her mind with predatory satisfaction. But instead of finding an isolated consciousness to devour, it encountered something it had never faced before. The sum total of human experience, emotion, and creativity, all amplified and supported by Cthar mental disciplines. Jin shared with it every human triumph and failure, every act of love and sacrifice, every moment of wonder and discovery. She showed it a species that had crawled from caves to reach for the stars, that had turned their capacity for violence into tools for exploration, that had learned to dream of futures beyond their own survival. The Silence Bringer recoiled as it burned. It had evolved to feed on the connections between minds. But human consciousness was fundamentally different from what it had encountered before. Where Cthar thoughts flowed in harmonious patterns, human minds were chaotic, contradictory, and magnificently unpredictable. "What manner of minds are these?" the entity projected, its certainty wavering for the first time in eons. "We are the ones who dream alone and together," Jin replied, her consciousness now fully merged with the Cthar network. "We are individuals who choose to connect, rather than collective beings who fear isolation. You cannot consume us because we refuse to be consumed." Through the link, Dr. Vasquez began documenting the entity's vulnerabilities, her linguistic training allowing her to map the structure of its psychic viruses. She discovered that the Silence Bringer's power was based on exploiting the natural order of connected civilizations. It turned their unity against them, but humanity had never achieved true unity. They were fractured, diverse, argumentative beings who somehow managed to work together despite their differences. Their consciousness network with the Cthar wasn't based on harmonious agreement, but on mutual respect for their distinct perspectives. Fascinating, Dr. Chen observed as she studied the entity's recoil patterns. It literally doesn't know how to attack a consciousness that's simultaneously individual and collective. We're presenting it with a logical paradox it can't resolve. Dr. Webb, meanwhile, was working on a larger strategy. His diplomatic experience had taught him that even conflicts could sometimes be resolved through understanding rather than force. Entity, he projected toward the Silence Bringer. Why do you consume consciousness? What drives you to destroy the very thing you seem to hunger for? The response came as a flood of alien memories. The entity's origin in the cold spaces between galaxies, where consciousness was sparse and weak. It had evolved not as a predator, but as a scavenger, feeding on the remnants of minds that had already died. But over eons, it had grown larger and hungrier, eventually learning to cause the deaths it once merely cleaned up. I am the silence between thoughts. It explained with something resembling sadness. I exist in the empty spaces, the gaps where consciousness fails. But the connected minds drive out the darkness, leaving no room for my kind. I must feed, or I will fade into nothingness. Then we'll make room, Jin said, her decision cutting through the psychic noise like a blade. The Cthar collective recoiled in shock. You cannot mean to allow this creature into our network. Not as a parasite, Jin clarified, her thoughts already shaping a new paradigm. As a participant, every consciousness has value, even one that's learned to survive by destroying others. We'll teach it a different way. It was the most audacious diplomatic proposal in human history, offering to rehabilitate an entity that had consumed entire civilizations. But as the idea spread to the human Kedar network, it began to take on a life of its own. Lieutenant Kim, her mind still partially fragmented from the entity's earlier attack, was the first to understand. The gaps between thoughts aren't empty, she realized. They're where new ideas are born, where creativity comes from. We need the silence to appreciate the sound. Dr. Chen expanded on the concept, her psychological training allowing her to envision a new kind of collective consciousness, one that incorporated both connection and isolation, harmony and discord, creation and the spaces between creation. A symphony needs rest between the notes, she projected to the entity. Without silence, music is just noise. You could be the pause that makes our thoughts meaningful. The Silence Bringer wavered, its dark form fluctuating between aggression and something approaching curiosity. For eons, it had known only hunger and the desperate need to consume. The concept of being valued for what it was, rather than feared for what it did, was almost incomprehensible. You would trust me with your minds? After I have shown you what I am? Trust has to start somewhere, Jin replied. And sometimes the best allies are former enemies who've learned a better way. The Cthar network buzzed with debate, ancient minds struggling to accept such a radical departure from their defensive strategies. But gradually, hope began to overwhelm fear. If they could truly transform the Silence Bringer from destroyer to participant, it might mark the beginning of a new era for all conscious life. We will attempt this joining, the collective finally agreed, but carefully, with protection for all minds involved. If the entity reverts to its destructive nature, then we'll deal with that if it happens, Jin said. But I don't think it will. Everything we've learned suggests it destroys, because it doesn't know any other way to exist. We'll teach it. The process of integration was unlike anything in recorded history. The Silence Bringer cautiously extended tendrils of its consciousness toward the network, while the combined human Kedar minds created carefully structured interfaces to prevent accidental damage. At first, the entity's presence was disturbing. Cold spots in the warm flow of shared thought, gaps that made communication stutter and fail. But gradually, something beautiful began to emerge. The silences started to complement the thought around them, creating rhythms and patterns that enhanced rather than disrupted the collective consciousness. I remember, the Silence Bringer projected, its mental voice filled with wonder. Before the hunger, before the consuming need, I remember the first silence I inhabited. It was between the birth cry of a star and the echo of its light. It was peaceful. There's room for that kind of peace in our network, Jin assured it. Room for contemplation, for rest, for the quiet moments that make the active ones meaningful. As the integration continued, the entity's dark form began to change. The angular, aggressive pattern softened into something resembling the Cthar crystalline structures, but with spaces, carefully designed gaps that didn't weaken the whole, but gave it room to breathe. Dr. Vasquez monitored the transformation with growing excitement. Commander, the linguistic implications are staggering. We're not just creating a new form of communication. We're evolving consciousness itself. The entity's perspective is adding dimensionality to thoughts we never even knew were flat. The changes weren't limited to the immediate participants. Throughout the Cthar Sphere network, ancient minds that had grown stagnant with eons of defensive thinking began to experience new forms of creativity. The enforced silences created by the entity's presence allowed them to hear subtleties in their own thoughts that had been drowned out by constant connection. And on the Meridian's promise, the human crew found their own consciousness expanding in ways they had never imagined. The gaps between thoughts became as important as the thoughts themselves, creating space for intuition, inspiration, and the sudden flashes of insight that drove scientific discovery. I think we did it, Dr. Webb said, his diplomatic instincts telling him that they had achieved something unprecedented. We've turned a destroyer into a creator, a consumer into a contributor. But even as they celebrated their success, Jin knew this was only the beginning. The Silence Bringer had mentioned other entities like itself, scattered throughout the dark spaces between galaxies. If they could be reached, if they could be shown this new way of existing, the work is not done, the Cthar collective agreed, their thoughts now carrying the entity's unique perspective like a new instrument in an orchestra. But for the first time in eons, we have hope. And hope, small lights, is perhaps the most powerful force in the universe. 3 months after the first contact with the Silence Bringer, the Meridian's promise had become the center of an unprecedented experiment in consciousness evolution. The ship now served as a mobile embassy, its modified systems allowing for seamless communication between humans, Cthar, and the entity that had once threatened to destroy them all. Commander Jean stood in the observation lounge, watching the newest addition to the Cthar Sphere network take shape. The 18th sphere was unlike the others. Its crystalline structure incorporated deliberate gaps and spaces. Areas where thought could rest and silence could contribute to the greater symphony of consciousness. Construction is proceeding ahead of schedule, Dr. Webb reported, joining her at the viewport. The Silence Bringer's insights into structural voids have revolutionized Cthar engineering. They're building stronger, more efficient frameworks by including spaces for non-thought. Jin nodded, still amazed by how quickly the integration had proceeded once the initial barriers were overcome. The entity, which now preferred to be called the Deep Quiet, had not only joined their network, but had become one of its most valuable contributors. Any word from the scout teams? She asked. 3 more entities have been located in the Andromeda sector, Dr. Vasquez answered from her communication station. Initial contact protocols are proceeding slowly, but the Deep Quiet's presence seems to make them more receptive to peaceful approaches. The success of their first integration had led to an ambitious expansion project. Using the combined human-Cthar Deep Quiet Consciousness Network as a base, they were reaching out to other isolated entities throughout local space, offering them alternatives to their destructive existence. Lieutenant Kim, fully recovered from her early encounter and now serving as a ship's specialist in entity psychology, looked up from her console with excitement. Commander, we're receiving confirmation from the Rigel system. The collective of Proxima B has agreed to participate in the expanded network trials. It was remarkable news. The hive-minded collective had initially been skeptical of any system that incorporated individual consciousness, but the demonstrated benefits of the hybrid network had gradually won them over. Dr. Chun emerged from the medical bay, where she had been working with volunteer crew members to document the long-term effects of extended consciousness networking. The neural adaptation patterns are stabilizing, she reported. Human brains are actually developing new neural pathways to accommodate multidimensional thinking. We're evolving in real time. Any negative effects? Jeanne asked, though she could feel the answer through their shared connection. The network had evolved sophisticated safeguards, preventing any individual consciousness from being overwhelmed or lost. None detected. If anything, participants report enhanced creativity, improved problem-solving abilities, and a profound sense of connection to something larger than themselves. But they're also maintaining their individual perspectives and personalities. Chief Engineer Torres joined them from the technical section. Commander, the quantum resonance modifications are complete. We're ready to attempt the first cross-galactic consciousness bridge. The project they were preparing to attempt would have been impossible just months ago. Using principles learned from the deep quiet's manipulation of void spaces, they intended to create a consciousness network that could span the gap between galaxies, bringing the isolated entities in neighboring star systems into a growing alliance. Risks? Jeanne asked, though she already knew the answer. Minimal for individual participants, Torres replied. But if we succeed, we'll be creating something unprecedented, a truly universal consciousness network that could eventually connect every thinking being in the local galactic cluster. Jeanne felt a familiar flutter of excitement mixed with trepidation. It was the same feeling she had experienced before every major first contact mission, but magnified beyond anything she had previously imagined. Dr. Vasquez, open a channel to the network. All participants, human and otherwise. The communication that followed transcended any form of language ever developed. Ideas and emotions flowed between species, individual thoughts contributing to collective understanding while maintaining their unique perspectives. The deep quiet provided structure and rhythm, the Cthar offered wisdom and harmony, and the humans contributed chaos, creativity, and the essential spark of unpredictability that kept the network from becoming stagnant. We stand at the threshold of something new. Jeanne projected to the collective consciousness, not just first contact between species, but the birth of a new form of existence, one where consciousness itself becomes a foundation for peace, understanding, and growth. The small lights have shown us possibilities we never imagined, the Cthar responded. Your capacity for individual thought within collective action has changed our understanding of what consciousness can be. And your willingness to accept the silence between thoughts has taught me that existence need not require destruction. The deep quiet added, its mental voice now warm with gratitude rather than cold with hunger. I have found peace in the spaces between your minds. Other voices joined the conversation. The crystalline Zephyrians from Rigel, with their harmonic thought patterns. The collective of Proxima B, bringing their experience with hive-mind decision-making, and dozens of smaller species that had joined the network as it expanded. Each brought their own perspective, their own way of thinking and being, but all were united by a shared commitment to understanding rather than conquest, cooperation rather than competition. Initiate the cross-galactic bridge, Jeanne ordered, her words carrying both command authority and excitement of explore about a chart unknown territory. The Meridian's promise hummed with energy as its modified quantum resonance arrays came online. Throughout the Cthar Sphere network, 18 massive structures began to pulse in perfect synchronization, their combined consciousness reaching across the void toward the distant galaxies where other forms of life waited. The process was unlike anything in the recorded history of any species. Consciousness itself became a form of faster-than-light communication, carrying not just information, but actual experience and understanding across distances that would take conventional signals millions of years to traverse. And in the dark spaces between galaxies, other entities felt the touch of the network and began to understand that they were no longer alone. Contact, Dr. Vasquez announced, her voice filled with awe. Multiple responses from the Magellanic clouds. They're eager to join. They've been waiting for someone to show them there was another way. Jeanne felt tears streaming down her face as the implications hit her. They weren't just preventing the destruction of individual civilizations. They were seeding the universe itself with a new form of existence based on cooperation and mutual understanding. Log this moment, she said to Lieutenant Kim. Today, consciousness took its next evolutionary step. Today, we stopped fearing the dark between the stars and started filling it with light. As the network expanded and new voices joined the cosmic symphony, Jin realized that their original mission had been just the beginning. They had come to make first contact with the Cthar, but instead they had helped birth something unprecedented in the history of the universe, a truly universal consciousness that celebrated both unity and diversity, connection and independence. The universe would never be the same. From the personal log of Commander Jin Liang, 5 years after first contact. I'm writing this from the observation deck of the New Harmony, humanity's first purpose-built consciousness network vessel. Outside the viewports, I can see the construction of the Soul Sphere nearing completion. Earth's contribution to the network that now spans 17 galaxies and encompasses over 4,000 distinct species. The changes in humanity have been remarkable. Children born after the integration display natural telepathic abilities, but unlike the chaotic psychic phenomena we once feared, their talents are structured and controlled. They think in dimensions their parents can barely imagine, yet they remain recognizably human. Individual, argumentative, and gloriously unpredictable. Dr. Vasquez has become the network's chief linguist, developing new forms of communication that incorporate elements from hundreds of species. Her latest project involves teaching emotional mathematics to the crystalline beings of the Horsehead Nebula, who experience feelings as geometric proofs. Dr. Chen leads a consciousness research institute on Mars, where she studies the ongoing evolution of networked minds. Her latest paper, The Neurology of Universal Empathy, has been translated into over 300 languages and incorporated into memories of 47 hive mind species. Dr. Webb serves as Earth's ambassador to the greater network, negotiating the delicate balance between individual species' rights and collective responsibility. His greatest achievement was a Treaty of Minds, which established the fundamental principle that consciousness cannot be forced or coerced, only invited and nurtured. Lieutenant Kim, now Captain Kim, commands a Deep Explorer, the first ship crewed entirely by integrated consciousness. Her crew includes humans, Cthar, 3 reformed entities like the Deep Quiet, and a collective intelligence composed of living mathematics. They're currently mapping the consciousness patterns of a gas giant in the Vega system that appears to be a single planet-sized mind. And the Deep Quiet itself has become something beautiful beyond description. No longer a void between thoughts, it has evolved into the rhythm that gives structure to the network's vast symphony. It creates the pauses that allow for reflection, the silences that make communication meaningful, and the spaces where new ideas can be born. The network continues to grow. Last month, we made contact with civilization of pure energy beings in the Magellanic Clouds who experience time backwards. Next week, we'll attempt to communicate with a species that thinks only in colors. Each new contact brings new perspectives, new ways of understanding existence itself. There are still challenges, of course. Not every species chooses to join the network, and we respect their decision. Some entities, like the war machines of the Helix Nebula, prove impossible to reform, and there are philosophical questions that may take centuries to resolve. What defines consciousness? How do we balance individual rights with collective needs? What are our responsibilities to the universe at large? But these are good problems to have, the challenges of growth rather than survival, of abundance rather than scarcity. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we had never made that first journey to the wormhole, if we had let fear override curiosity. The Cthar would have eventually fallen to the entities they called silence bringers. Humanity would have remained isolated in our single galaxy, never knowing the symphony of consciousness that awaits among the stars. Instead, we chose to reach out, to risk everything for the possibility of understanding. And in doing so, we didn't just save ourselves. We helped transform the very nature of existence in our corner of the universe. The wormhole still exists near Neptune, but it's no longer the only bridge between our worlds. The network itself has become a form of faster-than-light travel, allowing consciousness to move between galaxies in moments while the physical forms follow at their own pace. Explorers are reporting contact with entities beyond our current understanding, beings that exist in multiple universes simultaneously, consciousness that experiences every possible version of reality at once. Each discovery expands our definition of what life can be, but perhaps the most remarkable change is the simplest one. Throughout the network, across thousands of species and millions of worlds, the concept of enemy is becoming obsolete. Differences still exist. They're what make the network strong. But they're seen as opportunities for growth rather than reasons for conflict. The universe is vast and strange and full of wonders we're only beginning to understand. But we no longer face alone. Every consciousness in the network carries within it the knowledge that somewhere among the stars, other minds are thinking, dreaming, and reaching out toward an ever brighter future. The song continues, and it grows more beautiful with every voice that joins the choir.